Hello friends, behind me is a 2016 Land Rover Range Rover Autobiography. This thing had like an MSRP of around $150,000 when it was brand new. It's got 90-ish thousand miles on it, and there's a problem with the engine. The engine's blown, so I bought it off the individual that didn't want to fix the engine, and I'm going to fix it. So with this car, it's so big in my tiny garage, I decided to take the whole front clip off. And I'm going to show you a video on how that's done. Obviously, I've already done it. I'm sitting where it goes. I'll show you a video of how I did that in the description below. Okay, after that's all off, we're going to get started on this engine. All right, before we get started, why did this engine break? The previous owner had it diagnosed at least a little bit, and there were some codes. There was a cam to crank correlation code, there's a misfire in cylinders 5, 6, 7, and 8, and a persistent misfire code. Two ways of this engine that I've noticed how it fails is either in overheat condition, and mainly that's because of a failure of this piece, which I'll talk about later, or a timing chain issue. This one appears to be a timing chain issue. You see Jaguar Land Rover that use this engine, they label this bank 1, cylinders 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the driver's side bank over here, cylinders 5, 6, 7, and 8. So this is where our misfires are coming from. So I expect to find this side out of time, either with a broken chain or a chain that has slipped a couple teeth. Likely pistons hit valves, and we'll have to do some cylinder head work. But that's at least our starting point, and that's what I know. So let's start tearing it down. I'm going to start taking some of this stuff off the front. We'll get this power steering line off. Looks like we got an 8mm bolt, and then I'll kind of tuck it away down here. Then we'll get the belts off, and we'll get the coolant lines off, and then we'll get the rubber engine covers, noise dampeners on the side off. Get back with you after that. Okay, belts and coolant hoses are off. Start with your supercharger belt. Release the tensioner. I believe it was a 3/8 drive. And then get the belt off. And then release the tension on the main belt. Pull it off of a rib. It's not going to come off yet. Then you take the, since this is the 5-liter version with a mechanical fan up here, you unbolt the pulley that's here, pull it off, and that's going to expose a bolt for you to get to. And as the whole tensioner assembly is bolted on with 4 13mm bolts. One goes here, I think here, and maybe here. Regardless, you'll see 4 13mm bolts. And just pull that whole assembly off, okay? Then pull the whole belt tensioner assembly off. And then I went ahead and pulled off the idler pulley here, and the idler pulley here, and even the idler pulley above the alternator. Probably not going to have to take this cylinder head off, but if we have to, that needs to be off because it attaches both to the block and to the cylinder head. Okay, and then the coolant lines, those are difficult. There's 2 tabs that you got to push. So push the coolant line in, push the tabs, and then pull the coolant line out. I had to use on a couple of these some screwdrivers to help me push those tabs. They were pretty stiff. Okay, I got a little ahead of myself. I need to take this cowling off, the windshield wipers and the whole cowling up here, just to give me room to get to the back. So I'm going to do that next. I'm going to pop the caps off of the windshield wipers, pull the nuts off, get those off, and get all this cowling here in the back off. Right before I do that, though, I do want to show you this. Grabbed a screwdriver here. Let's see if I can film this here. Down here, this is going to be difficult. You can see, I can already tell that the chain down here is slack. Let me try to move it around here with a, see how I can move this around with a screwdriver? Yeah, this chain is loose, so it appears that it is still on the sprockets. So maybe we just busted a guide or whatnot, and it's just slipped a few teeth. Even if it did, it probably still hit some valves. But anyway, it's not an incredible amount of damage that I can see yet, but I do know that that chain is messed up. Okay, the wipers and the cowling are all off. Also pulled some of the cowling support, I guess is what I would call it, underneath here, just so I have plenty of room back here to get to what I need. There's a whole bunch of 10mm bolts. They look like this. They go in places like this. Okay, there's one there. There's one underneath here. There's one on top here. You just kind of got to follow it around and see where they all are. It's really hard to explain. I think the manual tells you where they are. There's another one that goes in over here on the side. One down here. There's like 20 of these things. Just pull them out and this thing will come out piece by piece. It's like 4 or 5 different pieces. Actually, before you do that, you got to pull these cross members out. It's just some 13mm bolts here, back here as well. Okay, and I recommend doing this by hand. If you use an impact, you can do it maybe on these strut tower ones, but back here there's some nuts that are pressed in underneath here, and I think the vibration from the impact could hurt you on those. All right, let's work on getting the vacuum lines off now. I'm gonna go around here and pull off every single vacuum line that I can find. We're working towards getting this intake supercharger off. All right, vacuum hose is removed. Down here there's a vacuum pump, right? Follow this up. It'll connect right here, and it'll connect right here. Get that hose off. You got a breather hose that goes from the throttle body here, around here, into the back of the valve cover right here. Then you have, on this side, you have a evap purge valve that connects here. So follow this hose over here. It'll come to a purge valve, disconnect it, and it connects into here. Pull that hose out. And you'll have another breather hose that'll go into your intake ducting here, and it goes into the back of the valve cover right there. This vacuum hose is hidden. It goes underneath to the back side of the supercharger. So I'm going to start pulling this stuff off. I've got a couple 8mm bolts here. I'll get this bracket off. I'm going to pull all these Torx bolts off here and get this bracket for wiring harness and whatnot off and pushed back. And then I can probably get to this vacuum hose here. And then we'll start getting the supercharger off. As I work on all the stuff in the back here to get this off, you know what, working on it here. I guess I'll mention that the proper way to get this engine out is how you get most engine and transmissions out these days. And it's to disconnect a lot of electrical connections and vacuum lines and fuel lines up top, the steering rack. And then you unbolt the subframe and lower it out of the vehicle. Well, I don't have a lift, so I don't have that luxury. That's why we're working on this car, or this engine in the car. So sometimes there's workarounds. So what I'm going to do, it's just too hard to get to some of this in the back. I'm going to go ahead and work on getting the supercharger out. And once it's out, unbolted, I'm going to pull it forward so I can get to the stuff in the back. Okay, so in order to do that, we got some electrical connections up here. This fuel line is going to come off because it hides some of the bolts here, right? It's fuel line is bolted to it as well. So we'll disconnect this fuel line all the way around here, get the electrical connections off of it, and then I'll get right back with you. After the fuel line's out, also I should mention at this point, I'm going to start putting screws back where they go when I can. It's kind of tough when you're taking this front clip off. I just kind of bagged and tagged bolts, but here I'm just going to put hardware back basically where it goes as I take it off. Anyway, to get the supercharger off, we need to take the top cover off first, okay? So go around here, T40 bolts all the way along the outside. Any one you see, pull them off. Right here in the center, you got 10mm bolts. You got 4 of those. We're going to pull those off. We're going to take the top of this supercharger off. All right, once you've gone around, you made sure you got every single bolt out going all the way around. Then you'll just have to kind of pry it just a little bit. I use a little pry bar underneath here, and there's a little tab here. Just lightly pry up on it. You got to pry too hard. You better double check. Make sure you got all these bolts out. All right. Now let's get this coolant pipe off. This will end up being replaced here once we rebuild this engine. This is a point of failure. You can already see it's leaking a little bit of coolant here. You can see some caked on coolant underneath here. And then it's plastic all the way down to the engine. Gets hot, gets brittle, cracks, coolant leaks, engine overheats within a matter of a minute or two before the driver can actually even tell. So this is a bad design having this being plastic. Anyway, we're going to get the rest of the supercharger off. So we have some bolts down here. in the valley here on both sides. And after those are out, we should be able to pry this thing up and off. Before we do that, you know, like I said, I got to take this coolant tube off, got to take the throttle body off. And of note here, you can see that there's some play in this pulley before the impeller turns. We'll end up replacing this coupler too. This is another failure point of these engines. The coupler gets some play in it as it breaks, as it ages. Let me get this stuff off. I'll get back with you. Okay, all the bolts are out. 8 bolts. 4 on that side, 4 on that side, like I talked about, 10mm. This thing has got dowel pins that locates it exactly where it needs to be, and sometimes those things get pretty tight. You're probably going to have to do what I did here. Just get a long pry bar underneath this throttle body against the neck of the water pump here, and just be very careful. Just baby it. Don't just all at once, you know. Give it a little bit of pressure and work it out here. You can see here now it's nice and loose. And we'll lift it off. I'm going to move this thing back. Try to get to some of that stuff in the back there. You can, if you want, take the oil filter housing out before doing this. In fact, I might go ahead and do that just to give yourself some more room as you pull this thing forward so you don't have to lift up as high. You can get it out with that in there, but maybe it'll be easier to get that off. All right, I'll get right back with you. All right, there she is. The supercharger is off. Let me show you what I did to get it off. So I did quite a bit of things without filming here. First off, like I said, I took the oil filter housing off. Once you get the oil filter out and you clean up, soak up some of the oil in there, you got 3 T30 screws there, 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 and there. And then you can pull the whole housing off. In order to get the housing out, I did prop the supercharger up just a little bit and then get the housing off. And then there's a black gasket that sits here. Okay. While the supercharger is kind of up at an angle, I grabbed the intake gaskets, pulled those off. And then I also went ahead and pulled out the coolant hose. There's 2 T30s, one there and one there, and pulled this coolant hose out. You can see there's still a black ring down there. That's because the plastic of the housing broke off and stayed in there. I'm going to have to get that out. And that's another reason why I'm going to put on a metal one, which I will show you later as this engine goes back together. Okay, moving towards the back here. What I ended up doing was just removing this connection from the back bracket, unplugging the changeover valve that's in the back, and unplugging the manifold air pressure sensor, I believe is what this is. And then there's a vacuum line that I unplugged back here as well. I'll show you on the back of the supercharger what that looks like. What I ended up doing was just unbolting. There's like 3 bolts for the bracket that holds the changeover valve and breather pipe and stuff. And then also unbolting the breather pipe from the supercharger on this side, just kind of pushing it back and then getting the supercharger out. Let me show you the back of the supercharger. All right, here's the back. I'll go from left to right here. Here's where the vacuum line is. You push 2 pins down, pull that out. Manifold air pressure sensor here. Here's a T30 screw. There's a T30 screw, and here's a T30 screw. Remove those, and this whole bracket comes off. And then here is the 2 T30s where the breather pipe goes in over here, and pull that out. Once you get that stuff out of the way, you're pretty much clear to take this thing off. Do remember that there is a coolant line that runs underneath this supercharger intake to the throttle body, and if you can, stuff's going to be brittle, it's probably going to break on you, but if you can, unclip that coolant line and let it sit down there. Alright, let's go back up to the engine and talk about the rest. You will also notice that the coolant bridge pipe, I think it's just called a heater manifold in the back here, it bolts in right here and then right on the other cylinder head over here. And just kind of connects the 2 in the back. It's also a plastic piece. And that's been removed. It's 2 T30s. It's tough to show, but they're on the back side of this. One obviously goes where you can see these threads right here. And these threads right here. There's just one more over here. On the V6 version, I think there's 3 bolts, but only 2 on this one. And I just disconnected it from the heater core. and pulled it, finagled it out. Also, along with that, I left the throttle body coolant hose that snakes underneath here connected to that, and just pulled everything out as just one kind of solid unit. We're going to end up replacing that pipe because it is also plastic when we put this engine back together. Now it is time to get the valve covers off, so I will be unplugging all these electrical connections. Looks like we have camshaft sensors here and here. There's a ground wire here, 8mm. These are the variable valve timing solenoid actuators. Those will get unplugged. We'll unplug all the coil packs along here and remove the coil packs. There's just T30 screws. You can see one underneath here that'll hold the coil pack in once we get this tray of wires off. Also on this side, we're going to disconnect this fuel line in this bracket for the fuel line and just kind of bend it out of the way lightly, just kind of bend it out of the way. It'll give us some room to get the valve cover off. And all the same stuff on this other side. We'll just be unplugging all this stuff here on the front, unclipping the wire tray back here, and pulling the coil packs out. Again, T30, and getting all the coil packs out. That's next. Okay, as you can see, all the electrical is off. Okay, and the whole harness, once you get it unclipped from everything, I kind of pulled this main loom back and put this underneath it to keep it up and out of the way. And on this side, kind of the same thing, tucked it over there, keep it up out of the way. And then as far as the fuel rail goes, there's an 8mm bolt here. This is like 17mm. I did loosen this fuel rail so I could move it up just a little bit to get it off this nipple here, and then pried this off and bend it back out of the way. There is a T40 bolt right here that bolts it to the cylinder head right underneath there. Pulled that out just to give myself some extra room. And then these bolts here on the fuel rail are 10mm. There's 4 of them, of course, on the V8 engine. And then I'll do these 4 over here. The coil packs are T30. They bolt in right here where you see this brass nut pressed into the valve cover. Pull those T30s out, then just pull the coil packs out. That's what I've done. Alright, next is to get these fuel rails off. They'll fight me a little bit, but these fuel injectors are 99% sure they're going to stay stuck in the cylinder head. There's a special tool that we'll get to in a second. I'll show you how to get those out. And yeah, I'm just going to get underneath here and lightly pry on each end and bring this thing up. Oh, there is a fuel pressure sensor, fuel rail pressure sensor here in the back. That needs unplugged. That goes with this this whole harness here. It's on the end of that, tucked away underneath there. Okay, let's get these fuel rails off. Okay, fuel injectors. This is one of the most pain in the butt part of getting these valve covers off. Maybe even this whole project. This is a type of puller tool. I've got it on the fuel injector, and I've already loosened this one and got it out. There's a proper tool to do this. It's kind of a slide hammer that's kind of bent. I'm going to link the proper tool in the description below. I cannot find mine. I can only find my cheap one. So I'm using this one. And essentially, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I literally just put a board here to soften this on the valve cover, put this in here, and then whacked it a couple times with a rubber mallet here on the end. Just lightly, multiple little hits, kind of like a air hammer would do for it, and pop this thing out. I'm going to continue that with the rest of these, and I'll get back with you once the injectors are out. Alright, all 8 injectors are out using that teeter-totter method. Hey, do I recommend it? No. Wait till you get the right tool. Again, the tool is linked down below. It's like $35, $40 or something like that. But I have done this several times. I'm not saying it's right, but I do kind of have a feel for how tight these things are typically in there and exactly where and how hard to whack it. So that's what I ended up doing. Do it at your own risk. There is one last thing I want to tell you about these injectors. Here's one of them. Here is what the tool will look like. Now, whether yours is the slide hammer version or this tiny version like this, this is really meant to, you know, put just a generic slide hammer or a chain or something and pull on it on this side. But you'll see these jaws open up. There's two places that these jaws could grab. I do recommend that you take the O-ring off. It's easier to, if it didn't come out with a fuel rail, I would go ahead and pull it off. It's easier to get these on. But anyway, these jaws will open up, and then this piece here slides down over them and pinches the jaws. Okay, so with that open, make sure it could go over this outer ring or this thicker inner ring. You want the ring, the thicker one right here. Okay, so if you just put it on the end here, that's no bueno. All right, get this thing, and it's tough. Finagle it down there. You can see I'm on it right there. Get it on there, and then kind of move the tool back and forth until that ring is really clamped. Then you're good to go. Okay, let's get the valve covers off. I think this is a pretty intuitive process to do, so I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of instructions, but just a general warning is to double check and triple check you get all the screws. Got one here. Just follow them all along the outside, especially taking a good look in the back. There's a couple right there that are close to each other. That one right here, it's got an 8mm nut on it with the ground strap here. Get that off first. Okay. Again, all along the outside, pull all those off, and then in the middle you've got them as well. Okay, don't forget those. Go around this valve cover. Any bolt you see left basically needs to come out. I'm going to do that on both sides. Get these valve covers off. Moving right along, valve covers are off. This chain on the passenger side, this looks pretty good. Like I showed you earlier, this one here, no bueno. We must have some broken stuff underneath here that we're going to reveal here in a little bit. Okay, now what I would like to do is take off these front covers. You got some T30 Torx bolts. I think there's 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Okay, each side. Let's pull these covers off. Okay, we got the front upper timing chain covers off. Again, this side looks pretty darn good over here on the passenger side. The chain is still slack up here, but I will tell you, I think we have a failed tensioner. As I moved the tensioner arm, there was a lot of slack in it, but as I was tapping it back and forth with the slack, I heard the chain tensioner kind of pop out. So I don't think it was ratcheting out and staying out like it should. So we'll see that in a second once we get all this stuff off here, but let's get that stuff off. So now time to start talking about timing, at least getting it in a timing position. There's a timing kit up here. I will link this in the condition description below. The main pieces we're going to use right now is this. This goes into the tone ring of the flywheel to put it in the timing position. And then this will go where the starter goes. We're going to remove the starter, and then this bolts where the starter goes. And this little tooth right here goes in the actual teeth of the flywheel to lock it. Okay. But before we do that, I want to do a little preparation and talk to you about this. Since we know we have one good side here, this passenger side, on the back of these camshafts, you're going to see some markings. You're going to see a slit and some markings. Now you're going to see some numbers. You see the numbers to the right there. And to the left is like a QR barcode looking thing. That needs to face down. So I'm going to turn this engine by hand, until I see that facing pretty much down, and I will know that we are real close to where this piece right here fits in. All right, I'm going to do that and get back with you. All right, scratch that, at least for now. I can't turn the engine over hand more than like a quarter of the way one way and then back, and that's because it's stopping. This is why it's good to do it by hand, but I think the damage is already done. This chain over here just keeps slipping off of everything, of course. And we've got some lobes that are pushed down here and keeping valves open. So that means what's stopping it is the piston is coming up and kissing those valves. So we're for sure going to probably have some bent valves. This cylinder head's going to come off and go to the shop, get some new valves and seals and whatnot. But for now, we have to get this thing locked into position so we can get this crank pulley off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and pull these variators off here and pull the chain off and let it dangle, and then I'm going to use a wrench here on the camshaft and move it around as needed. Maybe even take the whole camshafts out on this side right now, just so we have an ability to turn this engine over by hand. This is a 24 millimeter socket, by the way. So let me take these variators out, let the chain dangle, probably go ahead and pull these camshafts out on this side, and then we'll get back to turning the engine over by hand. Okay, do remember this is a unique situation. Since we had slack in the chain, it was really easy to get these variators off. You might be able to if the chain is tight, but it'll be much more difficult. Okay, so I basically took this variator off and turned this camshaft just a little bit, and we're nice and free. We're not hitting anything. The exhaust camshaft, I forgot that there's a tool in the box. It went right here. That will bolt onto the camshaft, and then you can just put a 1/2-inch drive in here and put a ratchet on the end of it and turn it. And I just turned it to a point where it's just about the least amount of resistance there. It wasn't as easy as the intake, but anyway, it was enough. And now we have, see if I can show you this here. You can see now that rectangle, it's really hard to see with all the glare there. That rectangle is facing down, and that line is almost horizontal across the where the cam cap meets the cylinder head. That's just about where we want it to be. I'm probably going to have to turn this just ever so slightly in the clockwise direction to get it to line up, but I want to get it real close, pull off what I need to underneath there, which I'll show you in a second, and then turn it just as I need to, and then slide this piece in. Let's get underneath the car and I'll show you. Apologies for the filming. This is a little bit tight underneath here. First off, there's a skid plate you're going to have to remove that's underneath the transmission here. It's a combination of 10 millimeter and 15 millimeter bolts. Pull that off, slide it out of the way. Then after that, you're going to be able to see the scoot in here. Switch hands. There's a hole here. I've already pulled it out. This is the crank position sensor off to the side over here. There's a T30 bolt that goes right here. Just pull the sensor out, and inside this hole, there I've got it lined up a little bit better. This is incredibly hard to show on film. You can see a square. Alright, that square is what this piece goes into. Alright, so we're going to put that piece in and bolt it in. Alright, and then there's that piece bolted in. Now we've got to do the super fun task of removing this starter. So it's not really intuitive to look how this thing comes out, but I will tell you we need to separate it at this line, not the line that's towards the back. This line right here. So we've got a bolt here that will pull out from the other side. This heat shield is going to have to be removed because underneath here, I don't know if you can see it, just barely, there's another bolt there that's going to have to come out. And then on the back side, there's a support bracket. Looks like 10 millimeter bolts on the back here, and then one 10 millimeter bolt there. And that 10 millimeter bolt is right underneath the drive axle, so you can't get anything on it. So we'll have to get like a wrench or something up there. Good times. I'll get back with you when this gets out. Okie dokie. The starter is out and the piece is in. You can see how it locks into a tooth of that flywheel to stop it from turning. That's exactly how you want it. Just bolts in where the starter goes, right here. And I want to quickly apologize. The kit, it was red plastic that I showed you earlier, was the wrong one. That's for the like a naturally aspirated engine of earlier, like 2010 to 2013. I grabbed the wrong one to show you, and I'm sorry. Some of the pieces fit, some of them don't. This is the one you want. This is the one that I will link down in the condition description below. This is the right one. This one works for the 5.0 and 3.0 supercharged engines. This piece here is for the V6 3.0 version. This one is for the 5.0. The one from the old kit actually worked and fit in, but it would have been using that. You can see here it is a cheaper version of the fuel injector puller here. These are cam locks. We'll get into those later. This is a fuel pump timing lock. We'll get into that later. This is the kit you want right here. Okay, now let's get this crankshaft pulley off. You're not going to be able to see this. In fact, I'm going to have to take a picture and just kind of show you and walk you through it or talk you through it. If this has a number 10 point whatever, it is lefty loosey. If you have a 12.9, which is what this one has, it is righty loosey. We are going to be turning this bolt clockwise to get it off, to get it loose. Okay? Now, you're like, hey, you haven't put on the crankshaft pulley holder yet. Well, I take these off without it. There is a tool that you can take these bolts out here on the crankshaft pulley, and it's kind of like a holder tool, and you use like a jack stand on the ground or whatever. It's one extra device to help the engine to stop spinning, because these bolts are on tight. They are on tight, but I've never used one of those, and this is engine number 4 that I'm doing this on. So you could do it at your own risk, but it's coming off this way. Okay, the center crankshaft bolt is out, and you can see that the key is facing down in the 6 o'clock position. That is a good thing. Okay, excuse me. Let's take these bolts out. They're Torx T50. Okay, once you get those T50 bolts out, I just use a regular harmonic balancer puller. Again, Land Rover sells an expensive special tool to do this. But, you know, if you got some ingenuity, you can figure out how to do it on your own. What I did is put the crankshaft bolt back in about, I don't know, a third to half of the way. Then put the 24mm socket on it and put the puller pressing against the socket with the bolts here matching the threads of the T50 Torx screws we pulled out. And I've already got this thing, I don't know, a centimeter off here. I'm going to keep going. This is how I do it. Now it's time to get the lower timing cover off. In order to get this off, not only do you have to remove the bolts, of course, you either have to remove the vacuum pump or the water pump. At this time, I'm going to remove the vacuum pump because I'm going to replace this seal anyway. This is one of those seals that goes bad, gives you an oil leak quite often. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to end up probably replacing this water pump anyway, but I'm going to let it chill for now. Remove this vacuum pump, then get all the bolts going around this, and then pop this lower timing cover off. Okay, we got the vacuum pump out and the lower timing cover off. Another way to tell that you got your timing right is to take this guy out of your toolkit and you, stick it in here. That fits in, you're good. Okay, let's take a look at what went wrong with this thing. So we knew that we had a problem on the driver's side over here, and I have discovered that the tensioner failed. So this tensioner is maintaining tension on that chain. I cannot move this arm in. The way that these things work is they work with oil pressure. As your chain stretches over the life of the vehicle, it'll ratchet out and keep this chain tight. This one, the ratcheting mechanism has failed. I can just push this thing in, say stuck in. It'll come out there in a second with gravity. but that should not happen. That should ratchet out and stay out. So this is what happened. This is why our chain went slack. That right there is the problem. So let's take all these timing components off. We got some rails to take off here. We got some rails to take off on this side. You'll notice this side needs to come off first. It's the outermost side. Let's do the good side first. All right, all the timing components are off. I would start with taking out the tensioner. Pull the tensioner off. It's gonna allow a lot of slack for you working up here. Then I pulled out the static guide. I think a 10mm bolt there, and right up here. Static guide is out. Then the tensioner arm. It's a T50 Torx. Pull that out and get the tensioner arm off. Then you can pull the chain up and finagle it out. And then the other side, same thing. Pull the tensioner. Then you have the static arm on this side. 1, 2, 3 bolts. And the tensioner arm up here is another T50. Pull that out. Then you can get the chain off and finagle it out. I also removed the oil suction tube. Don't know exactly. I don't remember where that bolted. Oh, right here. Oh, mine's in the way. Right here. And then again right here. Because the cylinder head is coming off, the oil suction tube had to come out. It fits in here. It's one of those tubes that you see right when you pull your oil cap up here. They put a vacuum line on there and they vacuum out your oil instead of draining it. Oh, by the way, I should mention, hopefully you're watching this whole video before you actually start this. Drain your oil before pulling this vacuum pump off. If you don't, the oil level is, up around here. And you pull this vacuum pump off and whoosh, all your oil is going to come out. Okay, let's pull the cams off, okay? These are T30 Torx. We're going to pull these caps off. This one doesn't matter. There's no tension on this. I would probably try to set your cam where it's the least amount of tension and then walk the cam caps off. You're going to want to keep these in order, both in the way they're facing, north or south there, and also the number as they go back. Okay, all the cams are out. I even pulled the cam buckets out and set those, of course, in order, front to back, so I don't mix those up. Now it's time to get the cylinder head off, and there's just a few things you got to take off before we do that. I've done that. I'm going to explain what they are. Here are your knock sensors right here, 2 10mm bolts. In the back of the cylinder head right here where I'm touching is a T30 bolt. The fuel line bolts to the cylinder head. Down, I don't know if I'm going to be able to show this. There it is. There's the exhaust unbolted. You got 2 15mm nuts. The one towards the bottom actually faces towards the front of the car. Pretty difficult to get to. But the one on top faces towards the back of the car, so I got that one from underneath. And then on the front here, I've pulled the 2 T30 bolts here. Then there's a 10mm bolt here. And then if your vehicle has the active steering, active suspension, whatever it is, I'm going to have to do some research on what this is. Because this thing has got electronic power steering in the front, but then it's also got a power steering pump when those lines run towards the back. I think it has something to do with the active steering or something of that nature. And it appears to be leaking. But anyway, that pump has to come off, and it bolts to a bracket. There's a bracket right here. Pull the 2 13mm bolts off, and then you can finagle this pump out. I put the bolts back in. You can see them there and there. Once that pump is out, just kind of set it down off to the side like I did. And then you have some 10mm bolts holding this on, the bracket on. I believe there's 5. It's a 1, 2. You got one towards it's on the back of the cylinder head, but towards the top up there. And then you got 2 down at the bottom, right above the AC compressor. The back one's hard to get off because the connector for the AC compressor is right in front of it. But anyway, and I got that bracket off. And the oxygen sensor, don't forget to take that out. There's a 8mm bolt for a heat shield right here. Then you just unplug it right here. Now it is time to detorque the cylinder head. I'm going to start with the bolts on the outside and work my way in.
I will get back with you. I think it's T55, but I'll get back with you. And the cylinder head is off. They were T60, by the way, T60 Torx to get those off. So I haven't seen this for quite some time. Last time I did it was an Audi 1.8 Turbo, where I found a valve head actually fallen out of its seat. The clips that hold it up on the spring had broke, and the keepers had broke, and the valve fell into the cylinder, and the piston had its way with it. I had to put in a new piston and new cylinder head in that case. And I'm not far off here. What is this cylinder number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cylinder number 6 here. It's got a hole in the piston. When I pulled the cylinder head off, I found a piece of the valve stuck upside down there, and it put a hole in it. 5, 7, and 8 look good, but 6 is toast here. Let me show you the bottom of the cylinder head. All right, here's the bottom of the cylinder head. This is obviously cylinder 6 right here, missing 2 exhaust valves. At least the heads and the stems are still in there. I'm going to take this to the shop, but I'm going to give this about a 50-50 chance that they can repair this. Might have to get a used or new cylinder head. And I say that because of the damage right around here. It's real close to the seat. Looks like it might be repairable, but they'll have to take a look at it and tell me what they think. Got some other bent valves around here. This one's bent. This one here is bent. So we're definitely replacing several valves. Intake valves, obviously, way bent. Hopefully it doesn't do too much damage to its seat underneath there. So anyway, I'll just take it and they'll check it out. They'll let me know. So yeah, that's some bad news. Most people will probably just replace the engine at this point, and that's on the table. I'm considering that. It's just these engines are super duper expensive. Probably looking at $7,000 to $9,000 out of the salvage yard for one of these engines. I'm really not worried about that so much. I really just like to repair things. So I'm gonna look into getting a new piston. I'm gonna look into if they can repair that cylinder head, or if I got to get a new one and crunch some numbers. What do you think I should do? Put it down in the comments. Let me know what you think. And stick around for part 2. And I'll let you know what I decided. And we'll build this thing back up. Catch you next time.